police offers, what are the most terrifying paranormal encounters you've had? I once responded to a call from an elderly woman who said someone was in her house. She lived alone and was certain she could hear someone moving around upstairs. My partner and I searched the house top to bottom but found nothing. The weird part, she told us her husband had died years ago, but sometimes she still hears him walking around the house. When we checked our body cams later, you could faintly hear footsteps upstairs while we were talking to her long after we had cleared the house. I was working the night shift, patrolling a rural area. I drove past an old, abandoned church that was known to be a hotspot for weird stuff. When I looked up at one of the windows, I swear I saw a shadowy figure standing there, watching me. I went in to check it out, but of course there was no one inside. The creepiest part was when I told another officer about it the next day. He said he'd seen the same thing at that church a few years earlier. I had a call once about strange noises coming from an old warehouse that had been closed for years. When we arrived, the building was completely dark and locked up tight. As soon as we stepped inside, we heard heavy footsteps echoing through the building, like someone running. We split up to cover more ground, but no one was there. The place was totally empty. We checked the security cameras afterward, and nothing showed up on them except us. I was called to investigate a disturbance in an old, supposedly haunted hotel. The owners reported hearing voices coming from an empty room. When I got there, the room was freezing cold, even though the rest of the building was warm. As I walked in, I heard a whisper right behind me that sounded like it said my name. I checked the entire room, but it was empty. The owners said they had never told me the stories of other guests hearing the same thing. One night, I was sitting in my patrol car in a parking lot, writing a report. Out of nowhere, I saw someone walk past the back of my car in the rearview mirror. I got out to see who it was, but no one was there. The lot was completely empty, and there were no nearby buildings or places for anyone to hide. I've never been able to explain that. I once responded to a call from a woman who said she could hear her dead father's voice in her house. We didn't take it too seriously, but when we arrived, things got weird. We could hear faint mumbling coming from the basement, but every time we went down there, it would stop. The woman said it had been happening for weeks, always at the same time every night. We couldn't find any source for the noise, and it still creeps me out to think about. I was doing a welfare check on an elderly man who lived alone in a rural area. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer, but I could hear shuffling inside. After getting permission to enter, I walked in and found the man sitting in his living room, staring at the wall. He didn't acknowledge me at all, and when I tried to get his attention, he just mumbled, "She won't leave me alone." There was no one else in the house, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. We were called to a domestic disturbance at a house with a long history of weird activity. The wife said she could see shadows moving through the house, but her husband thought she was losing it. We did a walkthrough of the house, and while I was in the basement, I saw a dark shape dart across the room out of the corner of my eye. It was gone when I turned my flashlight on it, but I swear I saw something. I was on a night patrol and parked near an old cemetery to take a break. While I was sitting there, I saw what looked like a figure in white moving between the gravestones. I thought it was a prank or maybe someone sneaking around, so I got out to investigate. But when I approached, the figure vanished into thin air. I'm not superstitious, but that night I left the cemetery in a hurry. There was this abandoned house in my town that always had calls about weird noises and people seeing lights inside. I responded to one of those calls and went in to check it out. The place was run down and definitely empty, but I kept hearing faint whispers as I walked through the rooms. At one point, I heard what sounded like a child giggling right behind me. I left that place as fast as I could and never went back. While on night duty, we got a call from an old lady who claimed someone was banging on her windows. When we arrived, there were no footprints or signs of anyone being outside, but she was convinced it happened. I walked around the house, and as I was standing by one of her windows, I heard the distinct sound of knocking on the glass right next to me, but no one was there. I responded to a noise complaint at a building that used to be an asylum. Locals always said the place was haunted. When we got there, we heard loud banging coming from the upper floors, even though the building was locked up. We searched the place, but no one was inside. Just as we were about to leave, the banging started again, but this time, it was coming from the floor we were on. One night, I was driving through a deserted stretch of road in a rural area when I saw what looked like a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, but by the time I stopped, there was no one there. I got out and looked around, thinking maybe it was a deer or something, but the road was empty. To this day, I'm not sure what I saw. There's this one stretch of road in my town that's notorious for accidents. I responded to a crash there late one night, and the driver swore he saw a woman standing in the middle of the road just before he crashed. The weird part, multiple other drivers over the years have reported seeing the same woman, but no one knows who she is or why she appears there. I was called to a house where the residents reported hearing someone walking around upstairs at night. They lived in a very old house, and this had been happening for months. We went up to check it out, and while we didn't see anyone, we could hear clear footsteps pacing back and forth. There was no logical explanation, and we never figured out what caused it. During a routine patrol, I noticed a light flickering in the window of a long abandoned house. I went to check it out, and as soon as I stepped inside, the light went out. I searched the whole house, but there was no one there and no reason for the light to have been on. The place had no electricity. To this day, I still don't know what I saw. I was working a night shift and got a call about a disturbance at an old, empty factory. When we arrived, we could hear what sounded like metal clanging and voices echoing through the building. We split up to search but found nothing. Just as we were about to leave, the noises started again. There was no one there, and we never figured out where the sounds were coming from. One night, I responded to a call from a guy who said he kept hearing knocking at his front door, but when he opened it, no one was there. He was genuinely freaked out, so I decided to stake out the house for a while. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, I heard the knocking too. But when I opened the door, the street was empty, and there were no signs of anyone around. I was patrolling near a large old building that was rumored to be haunted. As I drove past, I saw a figure standing in one of the windows on the upper floors. I assumed it was a squatter, so I went inside to check. The whole building was empty, and the door to that floor had been locked from the outside. Still gives me chills thinking about it. There's this small park in our town that has a lot of strange stories attached to it. One night, I was doing a routine patrol when I saw what looked like a woman in a white dress standing near the edge of the woods. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. When I got closer, she just vanished. The weird thing is, several other officers have seen her over the years, but no one can explain it. We were called to a remote cabin in the woods after the owners reported hearing screams coming from the forest at night. We searched the area but found no sign of anyone. Just as we were about to leave, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from deep in the woods. We radioed for backup, but nothing was ever found. I was on a call in an old, run-down apartment building when the lights started flickering. I figured it was just faulty wiring, but then I saw a shadow move across the hallway that didn't belong to anyone. I searched the entire building and didn't find anyone, but that shadow was definitely there. One night, I was doing a patrol when I saw what looked like a figure in a cloak standing by the side of the road. I stopped to check it out, but as soon as I got out of the car, the figure vanished. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, and the road was empty. It was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. I got a call from a family saying they could hear footsteps in their attic. We went up there to check it out, but the attic was completely empty. The weird thing is, you could still hear the footsteps walking around while we were up there. The family eventually moved out because they couldn't handle it anymore. I was called to an abandoned school where people had reported seeing lights on at night. When I got there, the place was dark. But as I walked through the halls, I started hearing what sounded like children laughing. I checked every room and found no one, but the laughter didn't stop until I left the building. There's this one house in my town that has a reputation for being haunted. I responded to a call there once, and while I was standing in the living room talking to the owner, I heard a door slam upstairs. We went to check it out, but every door in the house was still closed. The owner said it happens all the time. I was called to a cemetery where someone had reported seeing strange lights. When I arrived, I saw what looked like glowing orbs floating near the headstones. I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but when I got closer, the orbs disappeared. Several other officers have reported seeing the same thing over the years. One night, I was driving through a rural area when I saw what looked like a pair of glowing eyes in the woods by the side of the road. I stopped to investigate, but there was nothing there. A few weeks later, another officer reported seeing the same thing in the exact same spot. I responded to a call from a woman who said she could hear voices coming from her basement. When I arrived, I went down to check it out and found nothing. But as I was leaving, I heard a clear voice whisper, "Help me." I searched the basement again, but there was no one there. There's an old abandoned hospital in my town that's been empty for years, but people still report strange activity there. I responded to a call about someone seeing lights on in one of the windows. When I went to check it out, I saw what looked like a person standing in the hallway. I called out to them, but they just faded away.